Okay, so I love Warner Animation Group, right? Like, the Lego movies and Storks are great. And I also love Scooby-Doo. There's so many different variations of it that I really appreciate. And so I was looking forward to a movie that took WAG's signature, sharp dialogue, lightning-fast pacing, unabashed cartoonishness, and genuinely effective emotion, and stacked them all up in a classic big old Scooby-Doo sandwich. But the sandwich we got, I feel like some of those ingredients are here to varying extents. I respect that this movie was aiming for something colossally different with these characters, but it fell short for me, and I'm gonna break down why, in full spoiler-filled detail.
That was the best death scene since Endgame!
So the movie gets me pretty hyped up at the beginning, which feels genuinely heartwarming. This cop, who decided to be very differently animated than he was in the trailer, tries to take this mangy stray away until a young Shaggy saves it by giving it a name.
Snacks!
You also see the moment that Shaggy first gives Scooby his collar, and yeah, it's touching. All of this really works for me. The movie's making up its own little origin story for the characters, and it's done in a very tongue-in-cheek, fun, and sweet way. It's that exact WAG balance of genuine emotion with unabashed cartoonishness. The balance is perfect in this part of the movie. And actually, it maybe wouldn't have been if they kept that weird gag from the trailer where Scooby licks Shaggy on the face and then Shaggy licks him back.
Maybe don't do that again.
Yeah, good call. Sometimes you just gotta play it genuine. Scooby and Shaggy meet the rest of the gang for the first time on Halloween. That's a really fun idea. They go to their first haunted house, and Shaggy and Scooby say, oh, they don't want to make a habit out of it, and then it leads perfectly into a recreation of the classic Where Are You theme song, right down to this beautifully hokey skull shot. But with the added emotional layer of them growing up and forming lifelong bonds with each other over the course of the montage. The cartoon and the emotion working together in harmony. Huge smile from me. I know this isn't what they set out to do, but God, the beginning is so sweet and charming it made me not help but wish that this movie was more just a classic warm encapsulation of the Scooby-Doo franchise, a la something like the Peanuts movie from Blue Sky. And you get a sense of that warm encapsulation with the Scooby-Shaggy slapstick, the classic sound effects, and usage of long-lost archival recordings. But the movie feels almost bored of the Scooby shtick, resistant to any franchise trademarks, and rendering them as brief, obligatory inclusions.
Oh, jinkies. What? I'm sorry, someone had to say it.
It's like the movie wants to compartmentalize and put the haunted house and the masked villain in the first 10 minutes and get it out of the way as quickly as possible to do something completely different. And it makes sure to let you know how different it is.
This isn't about some guy in a rubber mask.
It's about one of us.
Although, of course, the leaning into truly supernatural elements is not really completely different for this franchise. You got Zombie Island, the live-action films, even the supernatural crossover, just to name a few, that go out of their way to emphasize that this time, the villain isn't just a guy wearing a rubber mask. This time,
The monsters are real.
but even that revelation feels like an afterthought in this. Its world gets crazy so quickly, you don't even feel like it's building to a twist departure for the franchise. It just kind of happens, without fanfare, so it doesn't feel all that special or exciting. With the plot that they picked, you got Scooby and Shaggy separated from the gang for the bulk of it, and Fred, Velma, and Daphne are not in this movie a lot. This could have worked, but we just do not spend enough time establishing the dynamic of the gang in this movie to make us emotionally invested in the reunion. You can't just take for granted that we, the audience, are familiar with these characters, and then skip over the step of giving the proper amount of time to solidify these iterations of them in the modern era. Especially since this movie seems really interested in wiping the slate clean and bringing in a new audience of children. It has to do the work on its own. You have to make us care. But until the end of the movie, you only get one scene with the whole gang all together as adults. And you know what they're doing? They're sitting down to take a business meeting from Simon Cowell, who shockingly, and very directly, kicks off the main conflict of this film. The gang is looking to make Mystery Inc. more of a legitimate business now that they're adults, but Simon Cowell accuses Scooby and Shaggy of being inessential workers.
A group can only be as strong as its weakest links. I can't invest with these two involved.
And the filmmakers must have been overjoyed to have Simon in this movie, because Shaggy and Scooby don't stop talking about him. They take his criticism to heart.
Friendship won't save the day.
Simon Cowell thinks friendship won't save the day.
Simon Cowell was right. You can't count on friendship.
I guess friendship really did save the day.
Like, why Simon Cowell? I mean, the last Scooby-Doo theatrical movie, Monsters Unleashed, ended with a performance by American Idol winner Ruben Studdard, as we all remember. That movie had its own Scooby and Shaggy are made to feel like useless members of the group plot. But Ruben Studdard didn't kick it off by sitting down at a table and telling them that they are screw-ups. It let you see Scooby and Shaggy's failure play out in an action scene at the beginning of the film. It showed them feeling like screw-ups in a way that not only fit with our past familiarity with the characters, but actively established it in its own story by showing it. In Scoob 2020, you had a flashback scene just prior to this. We saw young Shaggy and Scooby scared, sure, but they're also the ones to pull the curtain back on the bad guy's scheme. So this idea that they're so thoroughly useless to the group is not effectively set up in this movie. And not only is it tell not show, it's done this way just so they don't have to make the bold decision to have the gang express to Scooby and Shaggy that they're useless. And as a result, the gang's later regret about abandoning them feels hollow. They didn't abandon them so much as they just kind of sat there and even protested a little bit during a brief business meeting in which Simon Cowell threw him under the bus. Simon Cowell's the traitor. I'm surprised how much I'm bringing up the live-action Scooby-Doo movies in this, but again, in the original live-action 2002 film, it began with the gang separating, but it was an active choice as a result of their own argument in the beginning. But here, despite this being a movie that eventually opens a gateway to hell for the demon dog Cerberus of Hades, I would argue that Simon Cowell is the true root of all conflict and evil in this film! But yeah, okay, so the movie keeps going. Scooby and Shaggy get attacked by these robots, there's a big beam of light that sends them up to this ship, and that's where they meet the Blue Falcon. Oh yeah. So amidst the whole gang meeting as kids flashback stuff in the beginning, you know, these significant moments of Scooby and Shaggy meeting each other and then them meeting the rest of the gang that were hugely impactful and spotlighted in the trailers, but they also found a brief moment to crowbar in a quick reference to young Shaggy's appreciation of the heroes Blue Falcon and Dynamite. You know, in a scene that in the next line moves on to showcase Scooby talking about how he never had a bed before, or anything before. So yeah, the Blue Falcon, very overshadowed, blink and you'll miss it. Sure, Scooby and Shaggy dress up as Falcon and Dynamite for Halloween, but they don't comment on it any further. I didn't even really get a sense that Scooby loved it that much, but I guess he's a big fan. And this is the element that just takes over the whole rest of the movie. One could talk all day about what a Scooby-Doo story should or shouldn't be about in a general sense, and how much you work in a crossover element with another Hanna-Barbera property, but the important thing to take note of here is that I don't think that this specific movie set this up effectively. They were shaping their own origin story. They could have framed that however they wanted to set up Blue Falcon as very important to this iteration of the characters. But instead they gave you the classic vibe. They chose to focus on the gang meeting each other. And I thought it was great stuff on its own, but the rest of the movie suffers. Since this movie itself established the Blue Falcon stuff as such an afterthought, that is why it feels like an afterthought took over the story. But hey, you could still make a non-Scooby-Doo character taking over your Scooby-Doo movie work if you really make them a likable, fun, electrifying presence. They do not. I like Dynamite and Dee Dee, but Blue Falcon, well, let's clarify. It's not the Blue Falcon that we know. It's actually his lame adult son, Brian. I say the Blue Falcon we know, but it's more just the one Scooby and Shaggy in this movie apparently know. I don't think a lot of people are actually familiar with this character. I won't lie, I'm certainly not. So this whole bit where they're like, oh, you're clearly not the real Blue Falcon, he
Has a bigger red F on the chest?
I mean, does he? This movie doesn't really establish our expectations for him clearly. We saw some Funko Pops and costumes in the beginning, but I feel like a lot of us don't know who this character is. Blue Falcon's really the character you need to spend more time setting up in the flashback. We all get the Scooby Gang. This is probably the most high-profile representation of this particular property you're ever gonna get, and they choose to do an intentionally lame twist on it? Brian is immensely unlikable, egotistical, and constantly negating Dee Dee and Dynamite's ideas, even though all of his own are obviously terrible. He almost feels like he's gonna turn full villain with how awful he is, but then in the second half of the film they try to paint Brian more as this sympathetic son of a legend trying to prove himself, and all he needs is a chance, but no, I don't buy it. All you actually need to do is get over yourself and listen to Dee Dee and Dynamite. Briefly having Dee Dee mention at the end that she wants a raise isn't gonna cut it for how horribly he treated them. If you're gonna take over the movie, Brian, at least have a more satisfactory resolution where you own up to how discourteous you were. And look, I know this character is a riff on Batman, but between the cowl and the modern glowing blue eyes, I can't help but see Batman the whole time, and wishing that I was watching Lego Batman instead, who's actually likably and cleverly egomaniacal. But this guy gives Brian's a bad name. Look, I'm already stuck sharing the name of Brian from Family Guy. Don't do this to me!
Brian.
This whole movie, Ken Jeong is insulting my name, and I agree.
Brian.
I feel like if you just gave us Blue Falcon proper and not his lame adult son, you could have played the heroism of his crew completely straight, and it would have juxtaposed with Scooby and Shaggy nicely. Lean into how they have this heightened fanboy admiration of these perfect legends, only to learn to see the value in themselves over the course of the movie. But instead, throughout this whole movie, Shaggy's just being extremely petty towards Scooby for no remotely good reason. And this is where the modern update to have a more emotional angle to the arc, really, it's just not done well, I don't think. Scooby's, quote-unquote, leaving him behind to be a hero with Falcon just because, I don't know, he lets his collar come off so he can put on a suit. Shaggy tries to say that Scooby's ego is getting the better of him, which is just completely unfounded. And Shaggy's still idolizing Brian, even though Brian's obviously the one with an actual ego problem. I'm just so completely on Scooby's side through all of this. It's amazing how reasonably and calmly he rebuts Shaggy's immature drama in his ridiculous voice.
Just come with us.
But then suddenly Shaggy flips on a dime and, I guess, learned to accept that change is okay and that people can grow.
I was afraid that with his new suit and his new team, things were gonna change. And they did change. But that's okay. People can grow.
But by the end of this movie, Scooby's not wearing that suit anymore. He's not on the new team either. He's back with the Mystery Inc. team. So the lesson just feels like it doesn't apply.
We've grown.
No, you haven't. You didn't learn anything. The only thing that Scooby actually learned is that he's the descendant of Alexander the Great's dog, Peritas, which of course means he's needed as a key to open the gates of hell so Dick Dastardly can get his dog Muttley back, who's been trapped in hell for years, apparently. Oh, and I can't forget, Scooby also learns that these hell gates can only be closed by the descendant of Alexander the Great's dog and his owner. I expect a lot of people are gonna make fun of how insane this plot sounds. Like, oh my gosh, the hell in the Scooby-Doo movie? Wow, I can appreciate the third act for going completely wacko bananas bonkers as opposed to the aimless wandering and underdeveloped crossovers of the film's middle. And the ending even had a strong emotional moment between Scooby and Shaggy that, despite how much I wasn't liking their conflict leading up to that point, it was hitting me. I was feeling it. You see, Shaggy sacrifices himself to the underworld so that Scooby doesn't have to. And then they undo it a minute later and it makes no sense. For how insane and invigorating and emotional the movie is aiming to be, I honestly would have really respected if they had the audacity to leave Shaggy trapped behind the gates of hell, but end on a glimmer of hope about how they could bring him back and set up a plot of a sequel to go save him. I mean, that would have been nuts, right? That's the kind of cinematic universe I want to see. I still don't really even understand how Shaggy came back. Is Shaggy related to Alexander the Great as well? I mean, and he just so happens to also own the descendant of Alexander the Great's dog, even though they met by random happenstance? I don't think they're trying to imply that, are they? Look, either make an attempt to justify how Shaggy got out, or leave Shaggy in hell where he belongs. Is that too much to ask? Look, if I was Dick Dastardly and I had been trying to bring my best friend back from hell for years, I'd be furious to know that Scooby took all of 30 seconds to get it done. I guess you just can't separate Scooby and Shaggy, whose purpose, they determine at the end, is that they're the heart of the group. But no, I refute that. I think it's Daphne. Now, I felt the absence of Grey Delisle Griffin, of course, but I liked the movie's take on the Daphne character, really emphasizing her empathy. She's the voice of reason. She feels like the one character who doesn't want to pick a fight with the others, and she helps some of these emotional moments in the B-plot land because she seems to care about being separated from Scooby and Shaggy more than anyone else in the gang. She genuinely misses them and takes every opportunity to bring up the value that Scooby and Shaggy bring to the team, while also showing value of her own. It was sweet and well done. I honestly felt she was the quiet MVP of the film. And I'll give an honorable mention to Dick Dastardly too. I appreciate that he's a villain through and through, but still cares about his dog. Him playing up his tragic backstory as if he was more compassionate than he actually was is a good bit. I haven't really seen that one before. It's refreshing to see a modern animated movie basically have a classic mustache-twirling bad guy at its center again. Even if it would have made a lot more sense if the villain was like a mystery. Because there's no real mystery to solve here. In the Scooby-Doo movie. There are new characters we meet, like a pretty glaringly out-of-place Captain Caveman, but none of them are suspects. We're shown clearly who the villain is before Velma, Daphne, and Fred figure it out, and they figure it out pretty quickly. The movie does this thing where it makes you think that mystery solving is happening, when in reality it's just Velma talking very quickly about stuff she found on the internet.
I'll see if the combination of these elements matches a geographical location. And...
What does she do? She tracks a geographical location. She finds a police database of Dick Dastardly. She basically does an Ancestry.com test of Scooby, and most bafflingly of all, she happens to see a social media post of Scooby and Shaggy hanging with Blue Falcon.
Jinkies!
Which is how the gang figures out where they were, and it reminds you, I mean, like, why didn't they just, text each other? Fred, Velma, and Daphne thought their friends were missing, and then they just went on Instagram and saw they were hanging out with someone else. I mean, like, they're not even really missing, guys. What are we doing?
Zoinks!
So once Shaggy is released from hell, Mystery Inc. finally becomes a legitimate business at the end. Oh yeah, the discussion about that is what caused the main conflict of this movie, isn't it? Oh yeah, it hasn't come up again since, by the way. And what we see of the business is, it's very brief. It's a building that says Supernatural Mystery Solvers on it, but we don't see inside it. Daphne briefly calls the building the shop, which is interesting. There's tables to eat on outside. I think maybe it's meant to be like a Clue department/restaurant hybrid. And hey, you know what would have been nice? To solidify it as that. Have this ending where you got people coming into the business all frenzied to explain to Fred, Velma, and Daphne their encounter with the latest maniacal monster. And then you also have Scooby and Shaggy there to give these people some great food and help ease their nerves, make them feel right at home, calm them down. It'd show how Scooby and Shaggy really are the heart of the group. They're not inessential workers, Simon Cowell. They have a role in this business just by being themselves. But then we wouldn't have had enough time to have Blue Falcon show up again to start a classic animated movie dance party ending. At least this movie ends the way it started, with Blue Falcon coming in and ruining potential. The movie's more clever than that at times, though. Every once in a while, a really well-written gag comes along that feels a lot more like it came out of a sharp WAG comedy, like a Lego Movie or Storks.
Don't you know Halloween is just a marketing ploy by Big Corn Syrup?
Yeah, we're okay with that.
The robots attacked a gangly dude that had this habit of using the word like at the start of every sentence. Almost as if he was some middle-aged man's idea of how a teenage hippie talks.
Those parts are really funny. I mentioned this briefly before about Grey Delisle Griffin, but it needs to be emphasized. The celebrity voice replacements for the gang are a shame, and Frank Welker has been Fred since the 1969 original. Other than like a pup named Scooby-Doo where he's a little kid or he's being portrayed in live action, he is always played by Frank Welker for 50 years, and you replace him. Welker still voices Scooby at least, but honestly, I feel like they would have replaced him in that role too if they could have found a celebrity that was able to pull off anything close to the Scooby voice. Like, anyone could do a halfway decent impression, like, oh, look at me, I'm Scooby-Doo, but that's not good enough. In actual execution, I think most of them did well. Frank Welker Fred has an iconic sound, but if you're gonna cast Zac Efron, he at least turned in a good vocal performance and he made it his own thing. Will Forte as Shaggy, on the other hand...
Scooby-Doo is my best friend.
I'm sorry. It just doesn't do it for me. It feels like a half-baked impression. You either gotta go all the way with impersonating the Shaggy we know, or you just give him a different sound, like Efron did for Fred, or heck, Kaylee Cuoco has been doing for Harley Quinn. The filmmakers said that they got Will Forte to be Shaggy because they needed someone who could find a balance between the classic Shaggy voice and also pull off the emotional moments. Which I think is an insult to Matthew Lillard, because he could have totally done both. Come on. It all feels very corporately calculated. From the moment this movie was announced, the very clear goal was to emulate the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but with Hanna-Barbera characters. And in case you didn't catch, that's what they were going for. I mean, they made superheroes the focus of the plot, and they mentioned Chris Hemsworth in the movie, and they even have a part where Fred grabs a shield as he talks about avenging. But my issue isn't that they were trying to set up a cinematic universe, nor is it even that they didn't set up these characters with their own movie first before giving them these crossover elements. I feel like we're all going to have that impulse when evaluating this movie that, oh, well, they had to do the Iron Man thing. They had to establish this character before then you could start bringing in these other elements.
Because I'm an American man.
But you know what? Marvel developed it well, yes, but They can just tell their weird little Scooby-Doo story without needing a movie's worth of setup for establishing the characters, even if that's probably the movie I'd have rather seen. They've done plenty of strange, off-brand feeling stories with these characters before, that have focused on a comedic Shaggy Scooby offshoot, like an old favorite of mine, Ghoul School, or delving into a more serious and demonic overarching storyline, like a newer favorite of mine, Mystery Incorporated. This movie incorporates all of it, which could work. The problem here lies squarely in the execution.
What do these creepy skulls have to do with us?
No idea!
Really, in the end of the day, the best encapsulation of this movie's problem can be found right in the title. They specifically called the film Scoob, presumably to differentiate it from the existing theatrical Scooby-Doo movie, so you wouldn't get stuck putting 2020 in parentheses when you search for it online. And hey, that makes sense, and bonus, the name Scoob does still have enough of a flash of brand recognition and cultural cachet on its own. I know when I see that title, I hear Shaggy saying, "Zoink Scoob!" in my head. But quote-unquote Scoob is quite literally a piece of a larger whole, leaving the mystery by the wayside, abandoning the totality of what made this franchise what it is, missing a little bit of what literally gave it its name in the first place. For better or worse, they kept the Scoob and took away what he'd do. But they put in an exclamation point out of full confidence in their wildly weird approach. And you know what? You gotta respect that. And with that, I'll play myself out. The new Scooby-Doo is streaming on Voodoo. Can't go to an AMC or a Regal 2, but add it to your queue. They need revenue. The new Scooby-Doo, it's hard to follow you. Not about a mystery. They changed the voices too. Frank Welker, even you. Leasty Scooby-Doo. No go back, you won't find it on Hulu. The climax is as crazy as it's new. The new Scooby-Doo, what's coming after you? Changing movie history. More digital debuts and a Scooby-Doo. Depends how well they do. Na 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 na. Na 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 na. That is my review.
You are terrible.